Welcome back to another episode of the Beat the Banks podcast. And today we're doing something we've never done before, and that is sharing a live recording from inside our mastermind here at yieldfarming.com. Now, what you're about to see is an exclusive interview between David, the founder of yieldfarming.com, and Michael Kong, the CEO of Fantom Foundation, walking through exactly what he has done to grow Fantom to one of the biggest DeFi platforms we have today, what's in the future for the platform, and also what else is happening in the wider market. So this is going to be an incredible interview for you to check out. Make sure you stay the course. As I said, this is exclusive alpha. You wouldn't get this anywhere else. And it's a huge benefit of being part of the yieldfarm.com mastermind. But we're giving it to you today for free because we're such generous people. All we ask in return is a quick like, a subscribe, and make sure you ring the bell if you're on YouTube. And please drop some comments down below. If you're listening to this on iTunes or on something else, please just give us a 5-star review. And of course, feel free to drop some comments down below on whatever platform you're using as well. Right, that is it. Let's get into the interview. I'll see you shortly.
Hey David, how's it going?
Hey, how's it going? Good to see you, man. Appreciate you coming on. Like starting these off with just getting to know you personally a little bit. So if you wouldn't mind sharing a little bit about your journey in crypto and how you ended up as the CEO of the Fantom Foundation, that'd be great.
Yeah, sure. So my name is Michael Kong. I'm CEO of Fantom Foundation, as you mentioned. Kind of like really my crypto journey began in like 2012, 2013. I mean, that's when I first heard about crypto, and I, ended up buying a bit of Bitcoin and just kind of like talking about it, but not really like doing too much in the space. But then in 2015, 16, a friend of mine at the University of Sydney, so I studied there finance. I did a finance and information technology degree or finance computer science degree. He was telling me he was like a big Ethereum bull. There were a few of those people around in Sydney, not many at the time, but there were a few, and he was one of them. And so he was telling me about like, blockchain, I said, I heard about it. And he said, well, this is different. This is like about like developing smart contracts and all these different kind of applications. You can't be done on a Bitcoin. And he was even talking about like ideas related to like what we have now for like decentralized finance, and I'm putting like stocks on like the blockchain and doing like payments and settlements and all that sort of stuff. And so that's when I got me and another friend of mine who's working in the space got really interested in smart contracts and started like playing around with it and figuring out like how it all worked. And I ended up actually studying under my old professor who recently joined us just like last week on the Fantom team. His name is Professor Bernard Schultz, and he's a professor in programming languages at the University of Sydney. And I kind of work with him on building like a variety of different tools to analyze virtual machine instructions. So we would effectively translate virtual machine instructions into what is known as a control flow graph. And a control flow graph basically shows you the pathways of execution when you execute certain functions or perform certain actions with a smart contract. And with that, we were able to code in some like rules or some like logic in there to figure out certain bugs in smart contracts or certain like inefficiencies. And so we did a lot of that like sort of static program analysis. So I ended up getting like a much more technical understanding of like how smart contracts actually work, which was great, because at the same time, it was also all credit towards my degree. So I was able to do research that I was really passionate about, really interested in, that I wanted to learn about. And I was getting like full university credit for it, which was amazing. And during that time, actually in 2017, is when I also worked as a full-time engineer at a company called Blockade. And this is a software development company in Sydney, Australia, that I'm very much friends with the people over there. And they worked on a number of big projects. Probably the most famous one being Semantic Network Token, which back then in 2017 was known as Haven. And they later renamed themselves to Semantic Network Token, I believe in like 2018 or 2019, and have done like very well. A bit after that, in September 2017, I founded a cryptocurrency or digital asset focused hedge fund in Sydney with a few people in finance that were also based in Sydney. We managed to raise like a couple tens of millions of dollars for that. And we were also advising on a variety of ICOs. And one of the ICOs that we were advising on was Fantom. And so Fantom was a Korean project originally. There were like a couple of PhDs and associate professors that kind of came together and told us that they had figured out a new way of like processing transactions asynchronously, or processing multiple transactions simultaneously, better, faster, cheaper than existing Ethereum technology. And so, we advised them on the ICO and how to do the token sale and put some of our own money in there, help build the book for the fundraise, and also like help them with like the foundation or the company structure for the entity. Unfortunately, later turned out that the technology they were talking about was just talk. They didn't actually have developed something in reality, despite what they promised us about having simulation or having a testnet available, which was one of the reasons that got us really excited. And so we ended up having to like build our own development team to really like launch the original vision. And that's where like individuals like Andre Cronje came in, because he helped build the original team. Some of those developers are still with us to this very day. And so he, came up with like a variety of ideas on how to tackle, how to get the final ordering of transactions when it's asynchronous and a lot of those sorts of issues. So the developers ended up spending about a year and a half solving that problem. And we managed to launch a mainnet on the 20th of December, 2019. I think it's a surprise of a lot of people. And so since then we had like a bit of growth. And then in, late 2020, and 2021, we had tremendous amount of growth to the ecosystem that we have to this day. So that's kind of like the story.
That's an awesome story. I didn't know the part about you guys like getting like an empty basket and as like venture capital, and then trying to like, you had to build it yourself. That's pretty cool.
Yeah.
I've never heard of that happening.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting because this is quite unusual in the space, right? Like, it's very unusual for, a project to raise a bunch of money that had nothing and,
I mean, you literally got vaporware.
Yeah, we essentially got vaporware. It's very odd, for a project in the space, particularly during the ICO period of 2017, 2018, to get vaporware, have raised a bunch of money, and then for the project to like actually like deliver something in the end. So we had to kind of like get rid of the vaporware and actually create like the real stuff, right? I think that's the interesting thing about Fantom is that I remember that moment very well in July 2018 when the professors and the postdoc people, right? They had produced a technical paper that purported to talk about the technology, right? And the technology paper on the surface of it looked pretty good, right? And so like I looked at it and Andre looked at it and a few others looked at it. And then I sent it to a friend in Sydney who read through the technical paper, very, very like well-versed in distributed computing. And he like kind of smelled a rat, right? He kind of said, this is a bit like sauce. There's something suspicious about it. So he ran that paper through Turnitin, which is one of these like plagiarism checking software. And he found out that the algorithms discussed in the paper, the formulas, most of them were just ripped off Hashgraph. And so they did the classic, we had this joking kind of like computer science that like, or IT that like, the dumbest people out there, the ones who are like, hey, I'm just going to copy someone else's code and just change the variables, right? Like A to X, like, B to Y, C to Z. And, it's like new stuff, right? And that's exactly what these guys tried to do, but they got found out. And when we pointed it out to them and we showed them the evidence, which was irrefutable, they basically came clean and said, we're sorry, we're under a lot of pressure to deliver. Trust me, though. Trust me, we have good ideas and all that. We just didn't have time to put it on paper. So we took some shortcuts, right? And so, since then, I didn't want to work with these guys anymore, right? And, I was prepared to quit at that point because I was like, this is vaporware. I was lied to. This is really annoying. And so like, the moment when I saw the results from Turnitin, like my heart sank. My heart like absolutely sank. And I felt just like sick about like what had happened because the project had just raised $41 million, right? Andre like spoke to me, right? And he said, look, obviously it's not good, but let's try and work this out, right? He was like, I have ideas in distributed computing. That's kind of my background. My background wasn't really in distributed computing, to be honest. It was more like middleware stuff, like the virtual machine stuff, as I described before. And so he was like, look, let's try and work on this. Let's try and build a new team. I have some ideas. Let's try and transform this into something that will work in the end. So he really gave me that inspiration to stay because, to be honest, if Andre didn't say that stuff to me, I would have quit 100%. Like I was prepared to do it. I was almost like certainly going to do it. And then he convinced me otherwise. And, that's something that like I really am, grateful for because he helped us out a lot on the early days. He wrote some of the early code. He helped us hire some of the developers that we have on board. And now, it's that development team that really is carrying the torch with a few other people that have been brought on board along the way. So, Fantom's like technology is definitely like real. It's definitely unique. And we did, I believe, we have delivered on the original vision and are continuing to make much more improvements to the underlying technology.
I think that speaks a lot to you and your team's personality. Like there was almost something embarrassing that your name was attached to, and just shows a lot about like your drive and honesty that you were willing to put in the sweat to build out that vision. A lot of our community and I myself both like made a lot of money and really saw the battle of layer one narrative play out last year and even into this year. What would you say makes Fantom relevant in the layer one or layer two, like upcoming narrative battle?
There's a number of points that make us relevant, right? First and foremost, I think most importantly is like the technology, right? Because what we have built is something that is unique and something that is like robust, and it's just proven over time to be robust. So for example, like, for more than a year now, the network has never gone offline, not even once, not even for a millisecond. And so we are very confident that it is what's known as fault tolerant, right? Which is, if part of the network goes offline, nodes upgrade, nodes go offline just because computers sometimes go offline, that, it doesn't bring down the whole network, right? So we are fault tolerant. And I know there's some other layer ones out there or layer twos that have had, networking issues from time to time, which is, a bit troubling because that should never happen on what is known as like a fault tolerant system. So that's the first point. The second point is that, we have built a technology which has significantly increased network throughput compared to say like Bitcoin and Ethereum, because the way that we process transactions is via what's known like in an asynchronous manner. In other words, as soon as a transaction enters into the network, that transaction plus the surrounding plus transactions that were submitted around the same time, they get packaged and ordered into a block, right? And then this block gets appended on chain. You need just a bit over 2/3 of the total validating power to sign off on the block for it to be appended on chain, right? Because it processes transactions asynchronously, it means that you can process multiple transactions at the same time. So like a part of the network, may produce a block and that gets submitted to network, and another part of the network produces a block and that gets submitted to network. And so you have multiple blocks from different angles going into network at the same time. Yet, almost magically, they somehow get like ordered in the end. And so you have this final ordering of transactions, right? And so, via that method, it is a lot faster than, for example, like waiting like every 13 seconds for a block to be mined, or every 15 or every 10 minutes for a block to be mined, say on Bitcoin, right? Having to be included in that single block. And if you're not included, you got to wait all over again, right? And if you do happen to be included in that single block and you do get like appended to the chain, right? You have to wait for several block confirmations afterwards to really make sure that your transaction is included in a block that's part of like the longest chain, right? They follow what's known as the longest chain principle, right? For Fantom, there's no such thing as the longest chain. It's all just like a single DAG. And the beauty about it is that when you look at like the data structure visually of like a blockchain, right? So a blockchain is a DAG, right? A DAG is just a directed acyclic graph. It means that, blocks get ordered from like one after the other. It's not like you can't go backwards in time, right? Acyclic in that there's no cycles in the graph, because if there is a cycle, then you don't know, which event happened before the other one. So you always have to know which event happens before the other one. And of course, it's a graph because it's a collection of blocks that have edges or connect to like one other, right? To get like a sequence of events. With a DAG-based structure like we have, when you look at it in terms of a graph, it's quite messy, right? But the beauty about it is that because of the algorithms we've developed, you can actually unwrap, all those blocks and create like a linear list of like transactions, right? So you can look at all of the transactions from the beginning of time to the end as like a linear list, right? So in other words, like despite the fact that it's complicated to trying to get this final order of transactions, we have actually been able to do that, right? And the network is very fast. You can see that in the performance. So for example, like a particular swap on the Ethereum chain, it may cost like $100 or $200. On Fantom, you're paying like a fraction of that, maybe 30, 40, 50 cents, at most when the network is congested, about like $1, right? Or so. That's what like really, really differentiates us. And actually the consensus is not really the bottleneck for us right now. I've been speaking to Quan, our CTO, and he reckons that we can actually increase the network throughput several times more than we can currently process. But there are other like things to the peripheral of just consensus speed that limits transaction performance. For example, like the synchronization time between nodes, the amount of input and output data that goes into nodes, and also the performance of the technology above the stack, namely the smart contract execution engine or the EVM, which dramatically slows down your chain. So we want to like tackle these peripheral issues to dramatically scale up the network. So that is a technology stack. It's very robust. It works well. We're confident with the existing technology. And so for us, it's just about improving on it. There's no critical flaw to our knowledge about the technology where we have to like rebuild the whole system. It is fault tolerant, and it's proven itself for like over 2 years now, almost 2.5 years.
Thanks for that. Can you share some numbers with us in terms of like how big the development team is and how big the ecosystem is? Because to a lot of our members, when Andre left, it was like peak FUD. There was concern that there'd be, not a lot of development in the ecosystem, which is, of course, ridiculous. There's a ton of projects and a massive team beyond just Andre. Could you enlighten us on what that looks like?
Since Andre, said that, he had like left crypto, I think this was like the beginning or towards the end of February, beginning of March. They're obviously like, what is a lot of fun about the Fantom ecosystem? Like you guys talked about, there's a lot of myths going around. For example, like, oh, Andre's your only core developer. What are you going to do, right? It's like, well, actually, Andre hasn't developed on Fantom since 2019. And I can prove that to you because if you go to our like go-opera repository and you look at the commits done by developers, if you scroll down and you scroll down and you scroll down, you will see like other names that are not Andre on that list, right? So that just like tells you as like a fact. But on the whole, I don't know of a single project, honestly, that has come to us. And, maybe they made this decision themselves and they've like not really said anything to us. But as far as like communication goes, I haven't heard of a single project going to me and saying, oh, we're not building anymore because Andre, is out of crypto. Or we're not like, oh, we're taking our project offline because Andre is not involved in crypto. I mean, like since Andre said that he left crypto in March, beginning of March of this year, you just go through like, the tweets of projects, you just go through our own Twitter blog and you see that almost on a daily basis, there's new projects coming to Fantom, there's new DEX that's being integrated, there's new DeFi applications, new NFT applications, or, there's like an existing application that has continued to build on Fantom and have like released like new technology or, a new version of the application. So development is going very strong at the ecosystem level. And in terms of the technical development level, it had no change to the underlying development of the code. Why? Because Andre hadn't been involved in the core development. He was very crucial in the beginning, but since 2019, he hasn't been involved in the core development. So that continued as normal. And in fact, we're hiring more developers. We're just in the process of hiring right now, an additional like 4 people to work on specifically the middleware problems that I illustrated, including my old professor, Professor Bernard Schultz, from the University of Sydney. So, we're actively hiring and we're growing and the ecosystem is growing as well. Eventually, I think for us, it's to, promote the narrative of like, a great technology, to promote the narrative of that we have really technical people on board, like Professor Schultz, and to also promote the narrative that the ecosystem is still growing. And I think also like, market factors have played a role as well. People sentiment is not very good on the whole, high interest rates, high inflation, war, etc. So it is like a more difficult, I guess, like macro environment to be working in, but the foundation is like very, very strong. It has tremendous more funding than before, the previous market in like 2018, 2019. So we're in a very strong position to keep growing.
Is there a specific project within the Fantom ecosystem or multiple projects that you think really nail it on utilizing Fantom technology or that have introduced some new DeFi or crypto primitive that you haven't seen anywhere else?
So I'd say like, we have a number of like really big DeFi projects on Fantom, if I can just name some of them: Spooky Swap, Spirit Swap, Beats, Liquid Driver, and like many others. Those are the ones that I just like have on top of my head, Scream. And like each one of those, is like a DeFi protocol that offers like a similar service to what you see on like Ethereum. For example, like Spooky Swap and Spirit Swap are like DEXs, but these are like very powerful applications that have like really strong user interfaces. And in particular, Spooky Swap and Spirit Swap were some of the first, if not the first, major applications that I can think of that deployed on the Fantom network. So they deployed a bit more than a year ago. And I remember sitting in an office and pointing to my coworker, and my coworker turned to me and said, "Have you seen this guy, Spooky Swap?" I'm like, "No, I've never heard of them. Who are they?" And they're like, "Oh, they purport to be a DEX." And I was like, "Oh, okay." And me my security background is like, okay, let's have a look at these people, right? And then we played around with like the user interface and the swaps and everything worked so smoothly and it was so well built that they were like a lot better than like what you could get on Ethereum and like other chains, to be honest. I mean, like, obviously I'm a little bit biased when I say that, but I really believe that because that helped kickstart off the growth with the Fantom ecosystem. Because when you have like good like applications on chain, it attracts good users, which attracts more developers, which attracts more users, and you get this like positive feedback loop in terms of network effects. And that's why you've seen like exponential growth, particularly last year, in the Fantom ecosystem, in the number of daily transactions, in the number of new wallets created, in the number of like applications being built on the network. So it's really those like applications that initially help to drive the growth. And so, we're starting to see more applications, in the DeFi space, on the NFT space, similar stuff that you see on Ethereum. But also, interestingly, there are a couple of other projects in a different category. It's called like P2P insurance that are looking to deploy on Fantom and really show people that, blockchain isn't just about DeFi, isn't just about NFTs, but you can use it for a wide range of applications. And one of them, I believe, is like a P2P based insurance model, which I guess we can talk a little bit more about if you want to know about that.
Yeah, I mean, prior to you mentioning that, I was going to push back a little bit because, DEXs and liquidity pool websites like Beats are necessary for DeFi to operate, obviously, but I wouldn't say that they're new DeFi primitives that have introduced a new concept to crypto. An example of the latest one would be Layer 0. We like and cross-chain interoperability. So that was like, to me in my brain, the latest primitive in new primitive in crypto. So I'm just curious if there's, P2P insurance sounds really interesting. If there's anything else, or if you could talk a little bit about that. It just seems like, so there's so much in DeFi, like 99.5% of new dApps are just copycats or like the 17th ohm fork, for example.
Yeah, I mean, we have seen like new like cross-chain DEXs deploying Fantom, and I know that they're like multi-chain, so it's not something like that's unique to Fantom, but it is like a new sort of like technology, a new like step above like the traditional like DEX swap, where it's not just like on chain, but you can actually DEX swap and create liquidity pools that talk to one another like cross-chain. I think that's quite unique. The other thing that's quite unique is that there is like a project, for example, called Rift Finance, which is quite well backed by like US investors like Coinbase Ventures, and they have like an interesting model, about like how they do this like optionality to kind of like generate revenue. Another project that deployed on Fantom, which is also multi-chain, is called Feature Nuts. So this is a project that is funded by people like QCB Capital out of like Singapore. They have like a really powerful platform on being able to like cover the calls and puts and a whole bunch of other stuff, and really like automate the process of like creating options. And they have like a lot of like interesting software that like automates that. And so people can generate like higher yields, higher returns by offering these kind of services, while people on the other side, take the opposite position, right? So like you kind of see in more traditional markets, but this is stuff being done on the blockchain. So it takes advantage of transparency, of safety, the smart contracts are coded correctly. So like that's another interesting application I've seen deployed on Fantom.
Let's go even higher level. What do you think DeFi could use or can solve at like a global level to really bring in a lot more adoption? Right now, it's a lot of financial products, maybe some cool insurance, maybe some like synthetic stocks and equities and commodities. But I'm curious if you can think of, or you're excited about any really broad worldwide DeFi use cases.
We do have like already like synthetic stocks or synthetic like products out there, for example, like with synthetic network token and the in the exchange and the ecosystem. But in terms of new products, I mean, I think the most difficult problem to solve in DeFi really has to come down to lending, and that is under collateralized lending. So right now with like lending, it always has to be over collateralized, and that's because very simply because you don't know people's identities, right? And because they control their own wallets. If somebody were to put in like less collateral, if someone were to take out more debt from a system than the collateral they put in, then quite simply, they could just like walk away with what they borrowed and transfer the funds elsewhere. And then, they've made a profit, right? So only like over collateralized lending right now, like really makes sense with like all of these like protocols that exist, like Cream and MakerDAO, etc. If someone can figure out like a clever way of having like under collateralized loans, at least to some extent, then that opens up like a wide range of financial assets that is a very, very big, worth trillions of dollars, obviously, like worldwide in terms of traditional finance, that just simply isn't available in DeFi. And that's a really difficult problem. I haven't found the solution to it. I know some people who are working on it, clever ways of creating reputation with wallets, credit reporting, tracking of activity on chain. So using like a whole bunch of on-chain analytics to really like create like a risk score and to like calculate, the risk appropriately, to figure out like the interest for these loans, right? So all of this stuff is like kind of beyond me. It's not something I'm really working on, obviously, because I'm working at the foundation and that's my only job. That's what I focus on. But I think that is like a really interesting problem that if someone can effectively solve it, you just open up like, like billions of dollars worth of like value right there. Because we have, DEXs, so we have solved kind of like the trade, well, quote unquote, solve like the trading problem. We do have over like collateralized lending, which is great. we do have the ability, to collateralize like one asset for another, like MakerDAO, which is great, and create these like stable coins that are like backed, huge chunk of the market right now. So I feel like DeFi only has replaced only some of like traditional finance. It hasn't replaced like all of it, like nowhere near all of it.
Under collateralized loans would be quite epic. Also, I think like deposit token A on chain A, borrow token B on chain B would be quite interesting. On this subject, if you were not working at the foundation and you had a ton of free time, what would you be excited to build?
That's interesting. That's a question I haven't really thought too much about. But the first thing that really comes to the mind is what I mentioned before, P2P insurance. Because actually in 2017, I was experimenting like just conceptually about like a P2P insurance idea with like a friend of mine in Sydney. And we kind of worked through the model, like how it would work and all like the risks associated with the model. So I'm actually quite familiar with like how like a theoretically like a P2P insurance marketplace on the blockchain could work out. So if I wasn't like working at the foundation, if I was just like kind of like bored, that is like a personal passion of mine that I would try to be working on and try to be looking at like, different types of insurance that could be put on chain. I know one person in the Bahamas that's working on like a whole life insurance policy. It's a whole concept of like, you get this like life insurance policy, it compounds, you can kind of like tokenize in the form of like an NFT and has like the terms of it on chain. So it's very easy to like, trade policies with one another, which isn't really possible at the moment because the technology simply isn't there. So there's a number of like exciting ideas with regards to like P2P insurance, a number of like different like insurance policies that potentially you could put on chain. And it's just something that hasn't been done before. No chain has this sort of like P2P insurance. I mean, we have insurance when it comes to like, DeFi exploits, as people are probably like familiar with, like cover, but these are like protocols to do with like, like DeFi technology, right? The protocols to do with like insuring against like DeFi risk rather than like more traditional insurance. So that's like where the gap is at the moment. And that's what I would personally be interested in.
Okay. I like that. That is a really interesting problem to solve. There's going to be, potentially tens of thousands of people who watch this recording, and a lot of them are young developers. Is there anything that you would implore them to be curious about on building for Fantom, or that's something that like Fantom needs that you'd be excited to welcome into the ecosystem?
My like biggest advice for like new developers, you want to launch something new and gain a lot of traction is, think about like what the gaps are on the ecosystem, right? I would first of all like take a survey of like, the existing applications that are there and figure out like what is missing, because you don't want to be like another DEX, right? If there's already like 10 DEXs on there and they've already got like significant traction, you don't want to be like another like lending and borrowing protocol. The existing ones there already have like collectively like hundreds of millions of TVL. You just want to be like seen as like another copy of something that already exists, because then nobody's going to really pay attention to that. Why would somebody want to trust your code that is untested, that people haven't used before, and they don't know who you are? They're going to go with like teams that have like audited code where people know who the teams are, they trust who those teams are, and they have like a track history of like being able to like, successfully like custody people's assets and, deal with the DeFi stuff that people expect of them. So if you can find a gap and you can work on that, and that solves like a real problem, that gives you the potential to kind of like get a lot of users, right? Because all those existing users on the platform, if you offer them something that doesn't currently exist, that adds value, they can keep using the DeFi applications they're using, but then start using your application as well. For example, like, as I mentioned before, P2P insurance, like nobody's done this before. So if someone's able to successfully make a model and make it really clever and figure out like how to connect it to DeFi, one idea is that, people, insurance, they create a pool, they create a DAO, they put their funds into a pool, that pool insures the people, pool of funds insures the people who are in the pool, but then those insurance funds, don't just sit there, right? Getting eroded by inflation. You could like lend them out into DeFi protocols to generate returns. And, depending on like how many claims are made, you could even be making money from taking out an insurance policy in some cases. So, that's kind of like an idea of like, creating like, like something like that's new, that hasn't been done before, and connected it with the existing infrastructure on chain. So if you can find also a way of connecting to as many projects as possible, then, then that obviously like will help you get users, because then people using those protocols that you're connected with are then now like technically bridged to your protocol. So you're not just standalone by yourself. you've now integrated with all the existing liquidity that's already there, which is why people are so interested in, bridging like, NFTs and DeFi, for example, like being able to collateralize your NFT or be able to like lend and borrow NFTs around.
Yeah, it'd be cool to stripify that, where it's like, 12 lines of code added to your protocol, and you suddenly have activated P2P insurance on, any of the products that you offer on your platform. That'd be really cool. Yeah. Okay. So I actually wanted to ask you this earlier when we were talking about the projects within your ecosystem, but something that I've always wondered and I've never found the answer to is what's with the like Halloween spooky theme on all the projects? Where does that come from?
That's a great question, because it really came from the community. I mean, and, I understand the logic behind it, obviously, like Fantom, sounds kind of spooky, even though it's like F, not a PH. And so people just like kind of like ran with it. I mean, the first like really major applications of the point of Fantom, as I mentioned before, were like Spooky Swap and Spirit Swap. And, you go to the applications and, the kind of interfaces they have right now is similar to what they came up with initially. And so they were the ones that were like spooking this kind of like spooky theme, like Halloween like theme. And I think people just like ran with it in the community and, develop applications. Not all applications are like that, to be honest, like with the same theme, but like a lot of them definitely are. And the reason why is because, I think the interesting thing about the Fantom ecosystem as compared to like other layer ones that are out there is that it's quite organically driven. Like we didn't go out there and just pay people a bunch of money to deploy on our chain, right? Like we didn't go out there and just like hire the developers ourselves to build these applications. We like didn't build any of these applications. It's community people who found Fantom and found an opportunity and said, hey, I want to be the first movers on this chain. I want to be early on this chain. I want to, get as much like traction as I can for my project, if this chain takes off, right? And that's why, like, for example, like Spooky Swap and Spirit Swap, and even like a few others like Beats and others, like I mentioned, they've acquired significant amount of like users and TVLs because they were like the early adopters that came on chain, developed, great applications with great user experience and great user interfaces, and acquired a lot of the user activity, right? And they're the ones that come like pushing kind of like the Halloween theme. And so it really was organically driven. Like it was not, pushed out by the foundation. We didn't go to people and say, we want you to follow this theme. We didn't say you must follow these designs. We literally had no role in this. And I think that's incredible because it was all organic. And the growth on Fantom is almost all organic.
We have a question from Dan Carbonell. Actually, two questions. He has one in the chat here, which I want to get to in a second. But before that, he asked, I believe he was reading somewhere that emissions may potentially drop off next year. I'm not sure on the specifics for validators, or it may be harder to incentivize validators because of a cliff that's been set for sometime next year. Can you elaborate on that?
So I think he's referring to like block rewards around like validation, right? So right now when you stake, you earn kind of two rewards, right? You earn transaction fees and you earn block rewards. Actually, the transaction fees are like relatively high on our network now, but obviously, a big portion of like the earnings are like the block rewards, right?
Yep.
The block rewards emissions, I believe, will end in like a bit of like over 2 years, right? And so that's not that much time, right? And the reason why we have a lot of actually circulating supply is a bit of a long story about like how Fantom began and about like the whole history, but basically I think it's a bit like a bit over like 2 years, right? So like how do we incentivize developers going forward, right? Like assuming like block rewards would end. Well, one way is that they still collect transaction fees, but there's also the concept of like liquid staking, right? And liquid staking is this idea: you stake your FTM, you earn rewards, but then you also generate like a derivative token out of it that you can use to participate in like DeFi, right? And we actually do have some like native like liquid staking solutions on chain right now. For example, like one of them that I'm quite impressed with is called Stata Labs, and they're deployed on a few chains. And so what they've done is that they have like partnered up with, I think, 5 validators on network, 5 community validators, and you can stake with them, right? And so you earn like max rewards with them, and then you generate like another token, which is like SFTMX, right? And with this SFTMX, you can participate in a variety of DeFi pools. It has value. You can you can collateralize it to generate like stable coins, other assets, and like allow you to generate like additional yield in that way. So it is possible to generate staking yields as well as generate yields in in the ecosystem as a whole. And I think liquid staking is a great idea. It has a couple of weaknesses though, like for example with governance. But on the whole, it's like instead of someone getting the FTM and being like, okay, what do I do with it? Do I participate in the ecosystem or do I just like lock it up, right? Well, what happens if you can do both, right? You can both lock it up in staking and still participate in the ecosystem. So I think that will play a big role, continuing to incentivize validators going forward. And so we want to add a bit more features with liquid staking. So we are talking to, people like Stater and others about like, additional features that, might be useful for liquid staking. For example, like native stablecoins on chain. So those discussions are kind of like ongoing at the moment.
This is Dan's second question here. Is Fantom considering retroactive public goods funding to drive value additional to the chain, similar to what Optimism Layer 2 is rolling out?
We haven't really discussed, like, I think it's referring to like the airdrops with the new Optimism token. We haven't really been thinking about like airdrops going forward, because that's something that we might consider in the future, but we haven't right now. Because really the main focus is on the technology development, and also the other focus is on like helping builders build on Fantom. So providing some unique, like for example, like smart contract auditing services on the chain that other chains don't have, and providing like a whole bunch of like infrastructure like for the developers, right? And so, we're very much like developer focused, and also like funding some of the developer activities that add value to the chain as a whole, educational content, some other like software, like infrastructure plays. That's like mainly where our focus is on. The problem with like airdrops is that like, I think that like Optimism airdrop is like very clever. I think it is like a good way of doing the airdrop, but like in our prior experiences, and maybe we just done the airdrop like wrong in the past, sort of like people, do the stuff to get the airdrop and then they kind of like lose attention, right? Whereas like if we can like help build software, if we can launch new infrastructure on chain that will stay there forever, and then the builders like focus on getting the users because that's what they're incentivized to do, right? Because that's the whole business. Then that to us it appears to have been like more successful in like growing like on chain, more like minimizing the cost of per user acquisition, if you want to see it in like a transactional point of view. So that's kind of like my reply.
Are you able to share how much remains of the, I think it was like 400 million FTM, like liquidity mining incentives or development incentives?
I'm just looking at, I'm just like looking at the chat right now. I kind of misunderstood this question. Yes, we are incentivizing developers to create like quote unquote public goods. I mean, I think by that he's referring to like, like projects on the ecosystem that kind of like benefits everyone like kind of equally, right? Like different services and that sort of thing. Yes, we are focused on that. And we have done that in the past, for example, like the Fantom name service, which is like one.
You mentioned quite a few like bonuses for to incentivize building within the ecosystem. I really like the auditing service from my conversations with other founders, even just people who are building DEXs. It's like challenging to get, like trail of bits or quant stamp. And so, if you're building on Fantom or Avalanche, whoever you choose, it's just hard to get your project audited, and it can be very expensive. So it's cool that you're offering that, and it makes sense. It's FUDdy. Each time a project gets hacked or exploited, it's just massive FUD for that particular blockchain. So that just makes a lot of sense.
And the software we're thinking about, it's not just like a team of auditors. It's also like a whole series of software that automatically helps detect smart contract bugs. I can't talk a bit more about that right now publicly, but that's something that would be interesting for developers. Yeah.
What can you talk about publicly? Like really show us on why we should be interested in playing in the Fantom ecosystem. Obviously, there's been just like a ton of FUD lately on Roosh liquidation, on Andre, on all these, there's a lot. I'm sure you're aware of all of it. So yeah, can you share any alpha or things that you're really excited about to our community?
Yeah, I mean, from the people that like deploy in Fantom, you're really tapping into like several things, right? Like one, you're tapping into like really like a strong and loyal community, and like with like a strong user base that you can like definitely tap into. The other thing is, the foundation is there to like help people grow and develop on the Fantom ecosystem, right? Because ultimately our objective is to get like as many transactions, as many users, as many great applications on the platform as possible. So the more successful that applications are on our platform, the more that we're achieving like our overall objective, right? And so achieving that like, big platform, obviously the technology is important, but on the ecosystem, it's about like helping projects win, right? And so the way that we help projects win is, via like, technical support. If people need us to help them review their code, we can do that. We have developers for that. If it's about like technical integration, how to do it on chain, we've done that for like many projects out there. So we're really familiar with doing that and how to and how to work through like deployment step by step. If it's about, like marketing, promotion, we also do that as well. So we regularly tweet out, our latest developments with existing projects or new projects that deployed on Fantom. I participate in AMAs. I've already participated in like, 2 or 3 AMAs this week with like new projects or services that are deployed on Fantom. I'm more than happy to do that and to like reach out to their communities. And also on like a few other things, like, on the legal side, like we have an in-house legal counsel who can help out with like any like legal questions that you have. He's very experienced in the cryptocurrency space and also outside. He's been in the cryptocurrency space for the past like 4 to 5 years, and it's rare to find a securities lawyer like that who has a like level of experience. His name is Fred Pucci. He's based in like Sydney, and he has a lot of experience in like US law, Australian law, I believe also Hong Kong law, Singapore law, Korean law, like a bunch of like different jurisdictions, right? I hope that's correct if I remember correctly. And so, we can help on that. And, with like smart contract auditing, we get, software that can automatically like help you with auditing your contracts. I think that's a big value add as well. And in addition to that, we do like invest in projects on the Fantom ecosystem on like a relatively like regular basis, particularly if like newer ideas are kind of novel that, like a good valuation. So we've also got like investment going. And if you guys like want to create something that is like a public good, like your question like described, then that's something that we're also like really happy to like fund as well. So there's like a number of reasons why developers would want to like develop on the Fantom ecosystem.
You're incredibly well connected. It sounds like you talk to pretty much everyone in crypto as often as possible, and you've been in the space for an extremely long time. So just stepping back from Fantom for a minute, based on your understanding of crypto as it stands, the challenges that it faces, what are you like most excited about in terms of upcoming narratives? Like, what do you expect to be some of the bigger narratives in 2022? We can just stick with this year for now.
In my personal opinion, I think 2022 is going to be a tough year in general, not just for crypto, but in general for like everyone, right? Because a lot of, whether we like it or not, right? Like a lot of like the sentiment around crypto is determined by the overall macro conditions, right? So right now, like, taking a step back and looking at the world as a whole, right? High interest rates, high inflation, you got interest rates. Well, the government like underreports inflation, right? So when the government reports high inflation, it's a lot higher than that, right? Just to be clear. So even the government itself, which has an incentive to report low inflation, is reporting high inflation, right? And so that tells you there's a big problem. Talking about like raising rates, and we've got issues around like energy, we've got like Ukraine war, etc. And all of that stuff has like driven the markets down. Which is why the Nasdaq is down, like, I don't even know, like 26, 27% this year, right? In what is traditionally known as bear market territory. And so that impacts crypto because for whatever reason, crypto prices are tied to the equity markets or to the overall macro picture. It's correlated, right? And so, if like inflation continues to go up, if interest rates continue to go higher, if wars get continued or they escalate or there's another war somewhere in the world, it just kind of like add more and more bad sentiment. And I think that makes the environment difficult to work in because everybody's like a bit scared, right? But that being said, like even like during like quote unquote like downturn periods, right? There's a lot of development that happens, and actually usage also for blockchain networks also go up. Like I think people are kind of surprised to hear when I say that in 2018, Ethereum actually had more users than they did in 2017. And you might be like, but why? Like, wasn't this like a bear market, quote unquote? Like, didn't the price of cryptos like go down so much? Well, it did, but the user growth actually continued. And I think that's what we're seeing right now. If you look at the number of people using crypto as a whole, it continues to go up. And so I think over the long run, like blockchain technology is going to be as ubiquitous as the internet is, right? Like there's no reason, in my opinion, once we solve these technology problems, that it's going to be that big. So in 2022, I think the narratives around like, the layer ones continuing to scale, new like interesting projects being deployed in like DeFi, or maybe like outside of DeFi and NFTs, like I talked about P2P insurance. I think that could be part of the narrative. I think, if interoperability like via like layer 0, like you mentioned, really like deploying successfully and connects chains together, I think, that can also be like a big part of the narrative. But I guess the reason why I talked about all these macro conditions for so long is because that really does dampen these sorts of narratives though. But that's just like the marketing narrative, right? In terms of the actual development, I think it's just going to continue as fast as it's always been, if not faster this year than the previous year.
We want to build something here at yieldfarming.com. We're not sure what yet, but as a community, obviously we have an epic domain And so the natural inclination for us is to build a cross-chain yield farming aggregator. There's a lot of beginners, especially within our community, who join to naturally learn about yield farming. So they're beginners by nature. And so offering the ability to, let's just say, deposit USDC on ETH mainnet and enter a Beats pool in a single transaction via layer 0 is really exciting to us. I wouldn't say it's a new DeFi primitive, but it is scratching a massive itch in DeFi right now, especially for beginners. So as a technical founder and someone who's also very technically gifted, do you have any tips on just building crypto projects in general? It's a very broad question, but like epiphanies you've had over the years that you think could be really helpful for us in tackling that, putting the legal stuff aside for now.
Yeah, I mean, I just want to like talk about one point that you mentioned there, which is not exactly accurate, which is, I don't think I'm really technically gifted, honestly. Like I have some technical knowledge, I have some understanding of like how this stuff works, and I built some of it in the past, but I'm not like, I'm not really technically gifted. I mean, the people who are technically gifted are, people who are smarter than me. Like, for example, like the core developers of the Fantom network, who've actually like built like the really complicated technology. But anyway, like,
well, I'll add one point to that, which is I am by orders of magnitude way less technically gifted than you are. So we can just skip that part of the conversation and assume that like we're going to have a CTO who is actually very technically gifted. So I guess more just like epiphanies or tips on building and constructing teams.
I don't mean to go on a rant like that. So like my advice would be, really like understand, from the basics of how to write a smart contract, right? So for example, like Ethereum.org like really has a lot of tutorials on how to write smart contracts, from scratch, and like all like the pitfalls and kind of like security issues around it. Like they have a tremendous amount of tutorials. Even when I started in like 2015, 2016, they already had like a lot of tutorials. And now some things were a bit missing, which should have been included. In particular, like some sort of like some exploits that were not initially there, but people later found out that you could do like the hard way. But like the documentation is a lot better now. And once you've like gone through the tutorials and you know how to deploy smart contracts, also like research about like the latest like security issues that are out there, because there's always new security issues found. The critical thing that makes smart contracts hard is that because the Solidity programming language is not a very good programming language, it is susceptible to like a lot of like different like flaws in it. So for example, like integer overflows, where you can like overcount and you go back to 0, and that causes like a whole bunch of problems, right? And this sort of problems don't really exist that much in other programming languages because they're just like better done, right? And so, if you know what these like problems are that are unique specifically to Solidity, and you can also find solutions for them, like for example, like using like SafeMap, OpenZeppelin, like libraries and other tools, then, and you really master the security aspect of smart contracts, then you can be a great developer. Someone who can write great, secure smart contracts is rare because it is difficult, but it is like highly valuable because the best Solidity developers out there are all across the security aspects of it. And, orders in the space make a lot of money because, they're in high demand and it's highly specialized, and, it's really, really complicated stuff. So for a beginner, I would say go to the tutorials, learn about security, and then just play around like you do with any like programming language. Just play around, build random stuff, try and exploit it, try and get users to test it out just for fun and see how it is. Like a lot of like programming, I think in my experience or learning is just really quite like building random stuff and playing around like Lego blocks, right? And that's how I kind of like learned a lot of programming, was just like messing around, doing like, deploying smart contracts and just like having fun. And so that's kind of my advice. And then once you learn all of that, you can go to docs.fantom.foundation and you can figure out how to deploy specifically on the Fantom network.
Yeah, no, I think there are, if we were just to pick like the top 10 yield farms on Fantom, that would be something that we would offer on yieldfarming.com. So with like a single transaction on, let's just pick like five blockchains, you can, enter these pools without having to bridge from, Coinbase to ETH mainnet to Fantom as an example, and approve all these different platforms. Okay, so it sounds like
I think that's a very important solution and that you're working on, because anything that reduces friction increases usability, and increasing usability means you get more users, right? You know, the reason why like Google is so popular is because it's so easy to use. It's just a search box, right? And the logo. So the more that you can reduce friction, the better. And what you're talking about in terms of cross-chain liquidity pools in one transaction, that is part of it.
Okay, we have about 3 minutes here, so we can start wrapping up. One thing I like to do as we end these is ask if there's any alpha you can share or something that comes to mind when you think of like why Fantom. So is there anything that you would like to share with our community on? I know we've talked about why Fantom a lot, but something that, you know, like perhaps you're not really allowed to talk about, but like you can maybe lightly allude to it in some way, or where your lawyers wouldn't get mad at you.
There's like technical upgrades being done. So like as people know, like the SnapSync upgrade is being launched imminently. So this will allow you to sync nodes really fast with one another. We've got, you know, some like really nice hires, really experienced hires that are coming aboard for middleware development. These are people that, you know, have like PhDs or specialize in actual virtual machine development. So the quality of the technology has been worked on, you know, the quality of the developers is very high, and you'll start seeing their names popping around and maybe some few interviews with them, including an interview with my former professor, Bernard Schultz, who will go a lot into talking about the underlying technology and also trying to explain it like I'm 5 years old, that sort of explanation too. And, you know, we are in talks with a very powerful auditing firm to provide auditing services on chain. A lot of it automated as well, which I think like differentiates it from just a traditional auditing firm, that it's not like annual, like one contract at a time. It's automatic monitoring of smart contracts. And so, you know, your smart contract, you know, is continually audited, continually looked at. Each new deployment gets a new lockout automatically. And so you don't have to like, you know, wait for an auditor, you know, 3 weeks later to give you a report, and then you change something and you got to wait like another week to get like a new updated report. It won't be like that. It'll be something that's continuous. And I think that is like really powerful alpha, or something that's really powerful for developers out there, particularly like with DeFi when they're holding so much money.
Cool. Okay. Well, I'll be looking forward to those AMAs. Where will we be able to find those?
We're going to set it up, like do a recording, and then like kind of like post it online, right? So like do a recording, for example, like via Zoom. There's also going to be like a few more AMAs, like more regular AMAs that are going to be announced from the foundation. So it's just going to be like how, like, you know, recordings are usually done.
Appreciate it, Michael. Really awesome getting to know you and chatting with you. Appreciate you jumping on. Have a great weekend.
Yeah, thanks so much for your time. Really appreciate it. And thanks so much for your listeners for watching and listening in.
Alrighty, guys, how impressive was that? Incredible interview. Michael is an absolute beast. Hopefully you've got a better understanding of what's happening in the DeFi space moving forward, what to look out for on the Fantom blockchain, and who knows what else is going to happen in the world of crypto. It's just so exciting right now. Anyway, that is all for today. We hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please like, subscribe, and ring the bell for the show. Drop any comments down below, and we will see you next week. Ciao.